Brad Seaver sat staring out the window with the sun slowly sinking behind him. He was just killing time until he needed to head to the stadium. Glancing at the vinyl gym bag at his feet, Brad unzipped to make sure his gloves and cleats were inside. He developed this habit when he was playing in a kids' club, and his glove and cleats were stolen. After that incident, Brad took them home with him after every game. The nervous habit came about after he forgot to check his bag. Brad forgot he took out his glove to oil it and his cleats to clean them. As a result, he had to borrow someone else's glove and cleats. Brad had a terrible game, striking the ball out 3 times and making 2 errors. From then on, he checked and rechecked his bag before every game. After making sure the tools of his trade were safely stowed in his gym bag, Brad looked back into the kitchen. He was glad his wife, Kimberly, was there. She didn't travel with him as often anymore, and when Brad was home, she seemed to be gone more and more. Brad never dared to ask her where she was because he was afraid she would be gone forever. The thought that Kim might leave him brought back horrible memories of his first marriage. Brad thought his first wife, Cindy, was his soulmate, but it turned out that was far from true. In fact, Cindy often secretly cheated with her new suitor, and one night left him to be with her new love. But when he met Kim, Brad put all those horrible times in the past. He loved Kim more than anything in the world and refused to believe anything bad about her. When he looked at her in the kitchen, she seemed as beautiful to him as she had the first time they'd met a year after his heartbreaking divorce. After 11 years on the team, Brad was tired to the bone. His career had been better than some, but not as good as others. He wanted to retire after last year, but Kim talked him into signing a contract extension. And with a sense of sadness and relief, he realized that tonight's game would likely be his last. Despite having another year left on his contract, Brad wanted out. And today was Game 4 of the World Series, and his team, the Tampa Bay Rays, were losing 3-0. The series hadn't even been close so far, with Tampa losing the first game by 7 points, the second by 5, and the third by 11. "Do you think you'll play tonight?" asked Kim from the doorway of the kitchen. "No," Brad shook his head. "I still haven't played, and for good reason. I've had a shitty season. I'm only hitting 209 points, and I've made 15 errors. I haven't put up my best effort since the All-Star game. I'll miss the game, but I'm glad it's almost over. Even if I wasn't going to retire, I'm sure the Rays would have dumped me after this season." "You're not being fair to yourself, Brad," Kim protested. "The Rays made the playoffs with a 1-game lead. You had 5 hits in August and September that brought the team a win. And you robbed Robbie Baylor of a home run by catching a ball in left field that saved the game. Also, in Game 2 of the Wild Card Series, you had a pinch hit single that tied the game and the Rays won it." "I love that you're always there to protect me," Brad said, genuinely pleased at his wife's praise. Still, he wondered if she would insist that he play one more season. But let's be realistic. They're not going to play me. Still, it would be nice to get to at least one World Series game. Kim smiled. "Remember, the games aren't over until they're over." He chuckled. Kim loved to quote Yogi Berra's crazy sayings. He loved his wife very much, but she kept disappearing and it really bothered him. It drove him crazy, but he was afraid to bring it up. Brad was afraid that if he brought it up, she might not come back. But the season was almost over. Maybe then they could spend more time together. Brad checked his gym bag and stared out the window again. The lights were starting to come on in the city. He reflected on his sometimes uneven career. Brad could have started his professional baseball career after high school. Instead, he enrolled at Cleveland Community College in Shelby, North Carolina, to earn an associate's degree in accounting. Brad did this at the urging of his father. His father had a small accounting firm in Davidson, North Carolina, just outside of Charlotte. Brad enjoyed working with numbers and working part-time with his father, Henry. He worked mostly during tax season and summers. Brad prepared simple tax returns and did general bookkeeping work. It didn't pay him very much, but his father gave him all the free time he needed to play baseball. Brad attended North Davidson High School, where he was one of 2 stars on the team. Tim Wilson has been a pitcher on the team since his freshman year. He lost only 7 games in 4 years, with 2 of those games being due to errors he did not commit. Brad was also a starter as a freshman. He played center field and scored 397 points in his freshman season. When Brad and Tim graduated, both were drafted by major league teams. Brad was drafted by the Cleveland Indians in the 27th round. Tim was drafted in the 10th round by the New York Mets and was offered a signing bonus of $50,000. Tim immediately signed the contract. Brad wasn't offered anything. He wanted to sign with Cleveland and play baseball, but his father convinced him to go to college. Henry explained that Brad could continue to play baseball while earning an associate degree in accounting. At the end of 2 years, Henry was certain that Brad would be taken in the draft again, but this time in an earlier round. Brad listened to his father and enrolled at Cleveland State University, studying accounting and playing baseball. Brad excelled, earning a 3.8 grade point average and batting .407 in his sophomore year. Just as his father predicted, Brad was drafted. He was selected in the 6th round by the St. Louis Cardinals. After hiring agent Abe Schultz, they paid him a $75,000 bonus. The Cardinals immediately assigned Brad to the Peoria Chiefs, a Class A team in Illinois. Brad recalled his first day playing for Peoria. He was as nervous as could be. But the manager, Buck Springer, immediately put him at ease. "I know you're probably a little nervous, Brad," the manager said easily. "That's why I intend to let you sit on the bench for a few days to get you used to the way we work." In the 9th inning of that first game against Peoria, however, the manager called Brad in for a sub. Buck sent Brad in as a pinch hitter with 2 men on and 2 outs. He brought the score to 3-2 before blasting a home run over the right field wall. Peoria won the game by a score of 7-3. As Brad was changing clothes, the manager patted him on the back. "Nice hit. You're going to do well here, kid." Confused, Brad turned to Ray Swanson, the first baseman who was spending his sophomore season with the Chiefs. "I don't understand. Skipper said I'd sit out a few days before he planned to use me." Tim grinned. "Skipper does that with every new player. He wants them to relax while he picks out where to put them, so they get under pressure right away. He wants to see if you have the guts to become a professional player." "What if I kick the ball out?" Brad was even more confused and now a little worried. "He just wanted to see how you'd handle yourself. You didn't go out there and try to hit everything the pitcher pitched. You were patient and waited for your pitches. I think you're going to do well." 3 weeks later, Brad learned about the business side of baseball. He was traded to the Atlanta Braves, who sent him to their AA club in Pearl, Mississippi. This confused Brad, as St. Louis had just paid him $75,000 to sign with them. But quickly, Brad learned that he was part of a 4-player deal that sent 2 pitchers from AA and Brad to Atlanta for a pitcher from AAA, who St. Louis immediately moved to the majors. 2 of St. Louis's starting pitchers were on sick leave, and they were in desperate need of bullpen replenishment. Pearl was a suburb of Jackson, Mississippi, and for Brad, Mississippi was an unfamiliar new world. Nevertheless, he adapted quickly and soon became a mainstay player. It was here that he met Cindy Bremerton, a true Southern belle. They soon became an exclusive couple. However, when Brad learned that Cindy hated life in Pearl and desperately wanted to leave, it should have been a wake-up call. But by that point, he was so in love that it blinded him to everything else. At the end of the season, Brad and Cindy got married. At the same time Brad was traded to the New York Mets, they assigned him to their AAA club, the Syracuse Mets. At first, Brad decided that he and Cindy should spend the fall and winter at his parents' house. However, when neither his parents nor Cindy showed enthusiasm for this decision, Brad and Cindy rented an apartment in Syracuse. Brad's parents' cool attitude towards Cindy should have been another red flag, but he completely ignored it. Years later, Brad's parents told him that they didn't like or trust Cindy. The fall was beautiful, but the winter was bitter and cold. Still, Brad was happy because he was deeply in love with Cindy and was sure she loved him. But then, Brad learned two harsh life lessons. The first was that all wives are not faithful. And then Brad learned that in professional baseball, your worth depends solely on your batting average and slugging percentage. Spring training came, and Brad performed well enough to feel confident that he would be retained at that level. Things progressed, but Brad was still with the Syracuse Mets when the last players were let go or transferred to other teams. For the first 2 months of the season, Brad was not a regular player. However, he did come on as a late-game substitute due to his defensive skills and was regularly used as a pinch hitter. At the time, Brad was batting .254, had 3 home runs, and 17 runs batted in. He also made no errors in the field. In early June, Tim Wilson, his high school teammate and one of the Mets' pitchers, was sent to Syracuse to rehabilitate his left index finger. It had been broken during a rough fight in the clubhouse. Fortunately, he was a right-handed pitcher, so the fracture wasn't much of a problem. Nevertheless, Ralph was placed on the injured list for 3 weeks. He was sent to Syracuse to play a couple games and make sure he was healthy. The first day Tim arrived in Syracuse, Brad invited him home for dinner where he met Cindy. Brad was very naive when it came to seduction, and he completely failed to notice that Cindy was pursuing Tim. 10 days later, Tim returned to New York to take his position with the Mets team. Over the next 5 weeks, Cindy would periodically take their car and disappear for a day or two. She refused to tell him where she had been and got angry if he asked. Finally, Brad returned home and found Cindy sitting with her packed belongings and divorce papers. She cleaned out the checking and savings accounts and took all the jewelry Brad had given her. Cindy even refused to return the diamond engagement ring that belonged to his grandmother. All the mystery trips had been to New York to see Tim, and now she intended to move in with him and marry him when the divorce was final. She was as nasty a bitch as a woman could be. She seemed to take pleasure in humiliating Brad. If he hadn't been so consumed with love, Brad would have guessed that Cindy had only married him to get out of Mississippi, which she gleefully informed him now. "What a chump you are, Brad," she smirked. "I only married you to get away from this backwater town in Mississippi, but I never planned to stay with you." "Cindy," Brad held back tears, "I thought we loved each other." "Oh, please don't be so naive," Cindy spat out, shoving the divorce papers into Brad's hands. "I will succeed in this world and you won't. Tim told me that management doesn't believe you'll ever make it in the majors. They intend to keep you on the team for only a couple years in hopes they can trade you, and if that doesn't happen, they'll dump you." Brad watched Cindy carry 2 suitcases out of the apartment and out of his life. But the saddest part was that Brad believed her. Devastated was too mild a word to describe Brad's feelings. He had only had 2 serious girlfriends before marrying Cindy, and he had taken the breakup of both relationships hard, even though he had initiated one of them. But losing Cindy to Tim had plunged Brad into an abyss of despair. And Brad's play on the baseball field suffered greatly. 2 weeks after Cindy left, the Syracuse Mets demoted Brad. They sent him to their club, the Binghamton Rumble Ponies. After 2 days in Binghamton, Brad was ready to quit baseball and go home. Fortunately, Binghamton manager Roy Miller knew how to deal with young players. He had seen it all: homesickness, drugs, yuppies, and broken romances. Roy convinced Brad to give him 2 weeks. He then tried to get Brad to turn his depression into anger at his soon-to-be ex-wife. Roy also helped Brad find a lawyer who got Cindy to pay back half of the money withdrawn from her checking and savings accounts. The lawyer also convinced Cindy to return her wedding ring. Brad channeled all of his hatred and energy into playing baseball. In 2 weeks, he hit 394 balls, hit 4 home runs, and scored 19 runs. At the end of the 2 weeks, Brad fully committed himself to baseball. Brad finished that season with a .313 average, 19 home runs, and 43 runs scored. In the winter, the Mets traded Brad to Detroit, which upset him at first. But after talking to his agent, Brad realized that Detroit intended to start his career with the Mad Hens of Toledo, which was their AAA club. It was in Toledo that he met Kim. Her full name was Kimberly Anna Samuels. Kim was on duty at the hotel that Brad checked into when he first arrived in Toledo. She was a very beautiful woman with emerald green eyes and silky brown hair tied back in a ponytail. But Brad had treated her badly, being rude to her when she explained that the hotel was offering a discount for Mud Hen players, but only for a week. Ever since Brad had turned his depression into anger, he had lumped all women into one category and either treated them badly or ignored them. Kim's smile faded, and she quietly apologized and went back to her computer. For the first time since Cindy had left him, Brad felt guilty for treating a woman this way. After a few minutes of awkward silence, Brad mumbled an apology, explaining that he'd been in a bad mood. Kim's smile immediately returned, and she explained that most players either find their own apartment or move in with others within the first week. For the first few days of practice, Brad focused on hitting and playing on the field. But every now and then he thought about Kim. He even found excuses to stop by the front desk when Kim was on duty to talk to her. On his 5th day in Toledo, Brad arranged to share a room with Tyler Wilson, the catcher. But Brad stayed one more night, and when he went downstairs to check out, he asked Kim for her phone number and a date. She gladly accepted both of his requests. When the Mud Hens season opened, Kim took a seat in the wives and girlfriends section of Fifth Third Field, the Mud Hens' home stadium. Brad understood that Fifth Third Bank had bought the naming rights to the stadium, which was common for all sports these days. However, Brad was amused by the bank's name. He chuckled as he tried to imagine what happened to the first 4 of the Third Banks. About halfway through the season, a reporter spoiled his fun by explaining that the name came from the merger of Fifth National Bank and Third National Bank. Kim became a regular, always sitting in the same seat as their relationship grew. Whenever Brad would walk onto the field or come up for a hit, he would look over to where Kim was sitting and smile. She would always wave at him and smile back. The season went well for Brad. He had 298 runs scored, 94 RBI, 29 home runs, and a league-leading 6 triples. With 2 weeks left in the Major League season, Brad was called up to the big club. Unfortunately for Kim, Detroit's last 6 games were played on the road. Brad's play was respectable. He made 3 substitute appearances and had 1 hit. In the 8th inning, Brad also went to left field for defensive purposes. He threw out a runner trying to go from first to third on a looping single that landed between him and the center fielder. A month after the season ended, Brad and Kim were married. They rented an apartment for a month and started living the married life. But as it turned out, they had to give up their apartment in Toledo and found an apartment near Comerica Park in Detroit. Brad began spring training with the Tigers, and when the final selections were made, he became a Detroit Tigers player. Brad played 6 seasons with Detroit, with his best year being his 6th, in which he had 281 at-bats, 94 RBI, and 22 home runs. Brad also earned the Gold Glove Award and a .998 batting average and was named to the All-Star team. However, Brad knew that he was only included on the team because the All-Star rules required that there be at least 1 player from each team, and since Detroit did not have an outstanding star, Brad was chosen to represent his team. Brad was very happy with his life, even though they found out that Kim couldn't have children. It was a major blow to both of them, but they recovered. Instead of wallowing in what they couldn't have, they paid attention to their nieces and nephews. Brad had a brother and sister, and Kim had 3 brothers. The winter after his 6th season, Brad received word from the Tigers that he had been traded to the Tampa Bay Rays. Brad was sad to part ways with the Tigers, but Kim was excited about going to Florida. The next 4 years were successful for Brad and Kim. He hit in the neighborhood of .270 and played mostly right field, but occasionally left field. And after his 4th season in Tampa, Brad talked about retiring. He felt it was time, but Kim didn't want to hear about it. Brad always wondered if Kim was enjoying being a professional baseball player's wife too much. Of course, she denied it. However, Kim had a valid argument. The Rays had every chance to make the playoffs and even the World Series. Getting to the World Series was a goal every professional baseball player aspired to. That's why he signed a 2-year contract. Even with a 2-year contract, Brad could retire after 1 year if he wanted to. The first half of Brad's 11th season was okay, but after the All-Star game, his performance began to decline. And by the end of September, Brad found himself on the bench. But, as Kim pointed out, the Rays had made the playoffs and were now in the World Series. Brad checked his gym bag one more time and then looked for his wife in the kitchen. She was still fiddling around in the kitchen, and he hoped she would come over after the game. Sighing, he picked up his bag and stood up. "Do you have to go?" asked Kim, entering the kitchen. "Yeah, it's time to get this over with," Brad replied sourly. "Just remember that until it's over, nothing's going to happen," Kim giggled. "Right," Brad smiled and replied. "And when you get to the fork, pick it. Love you, baby." "I love you even more, baby." He kissed her. It was their traditional goodbye before each game. When Brad went onto the field to stretch, he was pleased to see that the stands were already full of Tampa fans. But Brad was a little sad because he will miss playing baseball. World Series coverage on Fox, Chip Fair, play-by-play, Steve Ember, color commentator. Game 4, bottom of the 9th inning. "It seemed like the Rays were going to bounce back," remarked Steve Ember. Leading 2-0 in the bottom of the 9th, they managed to get 2 players on base with no outs. But the Dodgers put their best player, Scott Sharman, on the field, and he struck out the first 2 batters he faced. Now the Rays have one last out left. Jose Antonio is batting .282 with a .346 average against Sharman. He's positioned himself in the batter's box and Sharman is pitching, informed Chip Fair. The first strike counts. "Sharman is just destroying opponents this season," Steve offered. "He's made 35 saves with an ERA of 1.94. But if anyone has a chance against Sharman, it's Antonio." Sharman swings and pitches. Jose swings and fouls the ball off his ankle. "Ouch. That's going to leave a nasty bruise, Chip." Looks like it's not just a bruise because Jose is still on the ground, obviously in a lot of pain. The trainers are checking his foot and ankle. Oh, that's not good. They signal for help to get Jose off the field. "We're hoping it's just a bad bruise, but we'll find out and let you know what the injury is." "I wonder who Joe Torrance will send on the field to finish Jose's game," asked Steve. "The situation is unenviable, whoever it is. Baseball players absolutely hate to make the last out in a game, and making the last out in the World Series is 10 times worse." "There's someone moving in the Rays' dugout," Chip reported. "It looks like Brad Seaver has been picked for this seemingly hopeless situation." "I'm very surprised at Joe's choice," Steve admitted. "Brad hasn't had a great season. He's batting just 209 points. However, he had 6 pinch hits this year and 1 in the postseason. And that hit in the postseason tied the game, which the Rays won. Still, it's not a great situation for anyone, especially a player having trouble on the court. This series could be over in just 1 inning." Brad settles into the box and Scott signals. He curls and shoots, swing and miss. Oh wait, he flipped the ball over and the catcher dropped it. "It was a nasty curve," Steve admitted, "but Brad's still alive." Scott snapped back and hit it. Brad beat him back to the screen. "Brad hit that fastball well, but he just didn't have enough power. Brad must feel like a mountain climber holding on by his fingernails." Scott pitches, and it's very close. Now the score is 1-2, 9 pitches later. This has turned into quite a battle, hasn't it, Chip? "I have to admit, I thought Sharman would finish off Seaver quickly, and the Dodgers would take the series in 4 hands. But Seaver played through to the end." Sharman returned to the court after a brief visit from Dodgers manager Mattis. He signaled, threw, and fired, and Seaver hit the ball back into the screen behind home plate. "On paper, it's a total mismatch," Steve noted. "But Brad Seaver won't go out on the night. If Seaver can get the puck out of that throw, that would be a big accomplishment. That would clear the bases. And then a single can lead to a win." Sharman is ready. He checks on Benson, who bounces to third and fires. It's a long fly ball to deep center field. Rodriguez has his back to the wall. He jumps, but the ball flies away. Rays win. Rays win. Rays win. Tampa Bay players jumped out of the dugout and pounced on Brad when he touched home plate. The fans in the stands were frantic and still cheering 10 minutes later. Before leaving the field, Brad looked into the stands, but Kim was no longer there. At the clubhouse, Brad was surrounded by reporters. One of them asked, "Were you looking for that curveball?" Brad shook his head. "I don't try to guess pitches because I'm not good at it. I just try to protect the zones. And on that hit, I had to widen the zone because I didn't want to hit it to the near corner. I was lucky it wasn't one of Scott's better curveballs, and I hit it well." Another reporter asked, "What do you think of the Rays' chances in tomorrow's game?" "Well, the next game starts at 0-0, so we have as good a chance as the Dodgers," Brad replied with a modest smile. "But there's one more thing. At the beginning of the series, people were predicting that the Dodgers would swarm us. Now that's not going to happen, and that's very satisfying." Kim showed up about an hour after Brad returned from the stadium. She was seething with such enthusiasm that Brad didn't have the heart to broach the subject of her disappearance. "I'm so glad you agreed to the contract extension," Kim enthused. "You've always dreamed of playing in a World Series game. Now you've done it and even won a game. I'm so proud of you and I love you more than I could ever say." That night, Brad slept soundly with his wife by his side. When he woke up, he felt better than he had in weeks. But Kim was gone again. Where could she have been so early in the morning? When Brad arrived at the stadium, the atmosphere in the locker room changed dramatically. Gone was the tension and discouragement. Warm-up and practice became loose and fun. To Brad's surprise, he found himself in the starting lineup, playing right field and batting ninth. Normally, this is where the pitcher bats. However, since this was an American League park, designated hitters were allowed. After the national anthem was played, Brad looked into the stands and saw Kim. She was getting comfortable in her seat. He tried to wave at her, but she didn't seem to notice him. Fox's coverage of the World Series, Chip Fair, play-by-play, Steve Ember, color commentator. Game 5. Dodgers manager Tommy Mattis and Rays manager Joe Torrance have traded lineups. Luis Javier has finished warming up, and the Rays take the field, Chip announced. Game 5 of the World Series is about to begin. Steve chuckled. "Chip, did you even in your wildest fantasies think there would be a fifth game in this series? If I were placing bets, I'd bet on the Dodgers knocking the Rays out, especially when Antonio was helped off the field. By the way, Antonio ended the series. He broke an ankle bone. But speaking of last night's miraculous win, how about Brad Seaver? He had problems after halftime, and I think Tampa would have let him go if he hadn't been so good on defense. I can't say enough good things about the way Brad fought Sharman until he got the pitch he needed. It's a battle of wills people will be watching for years to come. And this win seems to have transformed the Rays. I watched them during practice. The team is relaxed and revitalized. This is no longer the same team the Dodgers rolled in the first 3 games. Bottom of the third inning. So it's the bottom of the third, Chip offers, and Ronnie Collins gets the start for the Rays. He's hitting with a .261 on-base percentage and has hit 14 home runs on the season. So far, Sal Johnson has pitched the first 2 innings with 3 strikeouts. Johnson was a great acquisition in the offseason, Scott acknowledged. He's become the number 3 starter for the Dodgers. Both Collins and Johnson are set, Chip continued. He's twisting and chipping away, strike 1 on the outside corner. The velocity of that pitch was 96 miles an hour, Steve said in awe. He's one of the hardest hitters in the National League this year, said Chip, glancing at Steve for a moment, and then returning his attention to the pitch. Johnson gets the sign and starts turning around. Collins hits a ball into right field and makes a single. That's going to call out Corey Williams, who has always struggled with Johnson. He's only made 1 throw for 12 in his life. Anyway, Williams lands at the plate, and Xavier takes the pitch. Williams swings awkwardly, but he hits the bat hard enough that it goes toward left field and drops for a single. Collins gets up to second on the play. Now the hero of last night's game, Brad Seaver, steps up to the batter's box. Listen to the Tampa Bay fans roar. 4 pitches later. Steve lowers his binoculars and leans closer to the microphone. I have to say, Brad looks like a completely different hitter. For the last month and a half, he seemed to be really pushing every time he got on the field. Now he looks calm and relaxed. Seaver brought the score to 2-2, and here's the next pitch. Chip pauses for a second, then yells, "A long fly ball deep into right field. It's way back. It's from here." That ball hit deep into the upper deck. "Listen to the fans," Steve says, lifting his microphone slightly. Seaver, Seaver, Seaver. Steve lowered his microphone and continued. Looks like they won't stop until Brad comes out under the curtain. And there he is. Quickly waving to the crowd from the top step of the dugout. He's given Rays fans a lot to cheer about the last 2 days. In the bottom of the 5th inning, the Rays loaded the bases with nobody out, and Seaver takes the field, Chip said, as cheers swept through the stadium. The fans were on their feet, stomping, clapping, and cheering as hard as they could. I wonder if Brad has any magic left in the bag, Steve laughed. I'm sure Johnson isn't happy to see him in this situation. I don't think he's happy, Chip agreed. But Mattis is letting him pitch to Seaver. Okay, Johnson's ready, and he pitches. First ball. He was down and out. 2 pitches later. Johnson really dug himself a hole, Scott noted. He's trying to be too careful with Seaver, got the count to 3-0, and he has nowhere to put it. Johnson has the ball and he's on the rubber. He shook off 2 signs, but now he's ready. Here's the pitch. A hard hit down the right field line. It heads to the corner, taking a funny bounce. Matthews runs for the ball, but catches up to it and ends up ferrying it to second base. But 3 runs are already scored, and Seaver stands at third base with a standing triple. Well, how about that? Chuckled Steven. Looks like Seaver's bag still has magic in it. 3 pitches later. And Thor Grundle strikes out, Chip commented as Thor walked back to the dugout. Now Roger Danby is getting comfortable in the batter's box. He only struck out 257 this season, but his on-base percentage was 364, which is very important if you're a leadoff hitter. He also led the club by getting on base 14 times in the field. He's a feisty player, Scott offered. He's known for pushing himself at the plate, and with how hard some of these pitchers throw, that's bold or reckless, depending on your point of view. Johnson takes the pitch, Chip continues. He checks Seaver at third and makes a pitch. It's a long ball to center field. Donner gets under it at the warning track and takes it. Seaver tags out and runs home. The Rays have increased their lead to 7-0 inches. The inning ended after Bobby Sheffield moved the ball to short. Start of the 7th inning. Torrance replaced Grundle with Randy Mixon, Chip reported. Grundle leaves after 6 innings without giving up a run with 4 strikeouts. It was a very good game for him. Mixon has 5 wins and 4 losses this season. He's been used as a middle-inning reliever. But if he can hold the Dodgers scoreless for 2 innings, the Rays could bring in their shortstop, Jason Marino. I'm sure that's what Torrance is thinking, Chip confirmed. However, the Dodgers are fielding the top of their lineup, starting with Sammy Bills, who is batting at .294 as the leadoff hitter. His nickname is Flamethrower because he's so stacked, Scott grinned. He's fast and all muscle, and he'll try to destroy you if you get in his way. He's gotten into 2 fights this year because he slid hard into second base. Mixon is ready when the Bills go to the outfield for a batter. The first pitch is down and away. I don't know how Mixon plans to pitch to the Bills, but keeping him away from himself is probably a good idea. Mixon is ready and pitches the next pitch. The Bills hit it right down the middle and make a single. Thad Thorne, who has had a monster year this year, takes the field. He's batting .310 and has hit 39 home runs. 4 innings later. Thorne brings the score to 2-2. Mixon gets into his stance, checks the runner at first, and fires. Thorne hits it in the gap between center and right. The Bills round second and head to third. Seaver catches the ball and moves him to second. Thorne slides hard and is safe. When Seaver caught the ball, second base was a lot closer than I thought, Scott noted. He hit a strikeout to second base. His hitting is down at the end of this year, but his play on defense hasn't changed. The Dodgers have been relatively quiet so far, Chip offered, but their bats have suddenly come alive. And now Thad Blanken is also out on the field with 2 balls and no outs. Mixon dug himself a little hole, Scott admitted. Torrance is coming on the court right now to talk to Mixon. Do you think he'll make a difference? I doubt it, Chip. Mixon's got a good fastball and a wicked curve. I guess you're right, because Torrance goes back to the dugout, leaving Mixon to pitch to Blanken, one of the Dodgers' hottest players. He's batting .347 with 49 home runs. Not only that, Chip, but Blanken's lifetime batting average against Mixon is at 427. Looks like they're not going to take any chances. They're intentionally walking Blanken to load the bases, Chip reports as Blanken runs to first base. Their clean hitter, Ray Freeman, is getting comfortable in the box. Mixon's first pitch is a strike. A double play would be nice right now, Scott says hopefully. Swing, and Freeman hits a dribbler down the first baseline. Mixon goes out of bounds and takes the ball with his bare hands. He has only one opportunity to make a play, and it's first. The throw was well-timed, but the Bills scored easily from third. The Dodgers scored their first run with runners on second and third with 1 out. While we wait for Hector Aponte to settle into the batter's box, Scott smoothly transitions, we want to remind our listeners that Brandon Ford on East Adamo Drive offers 0% interest financing on all of their new and used vehicles. Aponte is set in the batter's box and Mixon is ready, Chip began again. Mixon will have to be careful because Aponte can usually hit the ball. He has only 36 strikeouts this season. 3 pitches later. Aponte brought the score to 2, 1 with 1 out and 2 on. Chip glanced at the laptop beside him. This is Aponte's meat and potatoes, Scott said. He'll be looking for something in his zone. If he doesn't find it, he'll wait for Mixon. Chip continues. Mixon sets up and gives it to him. Aponte swings around and makes a single into right field. Thorne scores easily and Blanken is sent home. Seaver picks up the ball and with one leap throws it to home plate and Blanken hits it. What a throw from Seaver, Scott enthused. That game at home wasn't even close. Now, with 2 outs and a man on first, Jordan Donner comes out to bat. Mixon looks a little unsure. So catcher Jimmy Fox comes out to talk to him. 4 pitches later. Mixon walked Donner on 4 pitches, putting runners on first and second with 2 outs. It looked like Torrance was going to make a change. He's signaled to the bullpen, and it looks like he's bringing right-hander Greg Cole into the game. He hasn't had a great year, 3 wins and 6 losses. His ERA is 5.12. However, Greg has been playing much better lately. He made a save in one of the wildcard games and another in the ALCS finals. This bullpen call is brought to you by Roger Harper's Steakhouse, located right outside the stadium. Whether you want filet mignon, ribeye, New York strip steak, or porterhouse, it will be prepared just the way you want it. Every Thursday is ladies' night, and every lady accompanied by her husband or boyfriend gets her steak for free. And Roger Harper's has a 2-for-1 happy hour from 5 to 6 p.m. Cole finished warming up and Ray Matthews came out to pitch to the hitters. And here's the first pitch, a long fly ball to left field. It flies off the wall. With 2 outs, both runners were in an out-of-bounds position. Aponte would score easily, and Donner would be circled around third, and he would score too, as the throw would be broken up. It looks like the Dodgers are finally waking up, Scott offered. They've scored 4 runs in this inning so far. This game could turn against the Rays if they're not careful. With 2 outs and no players out, the Dodgers opted for a pinch hit game. However, Danny Cruz fielded the ball for an out, ending the inning. The Dodgers cut the score to 7-4, but their lead did not end there. In the bottom of the 8th inning, Bobby Sheffield hit a double to right. With nobody out, Brad delivered a single, scoring Sheffield. He then stole second base and advanced to third after a long shot to right field. Brad then scored on another long ball. Post-game summary. The Rays talked loud and often, Chip reported. They scored 9 runs on 12 hits, and Brad Seaver continues to surprise everyone. He had 7 RBI and scored 1 run. And we can't forget that great throw home that nailed Blanken. It was a truly inspired Rays game, Scott agreed. Tomorrow is a travel day because the series moves to Los Angeles. Pre-game will start at 8 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, Chips continued, and the game will start at 9:05. Thanks for watching, and we hope you'll come out for Game 6 of the World Series. Normally, the Rays wouldn't allow wives to fly on the team plane. But with the team's return, they lifted the ban and offered a seat to any wife who wanted to fly. Most of the wives agreed, but Brad wasn't sure Kim would go. The Rays plane left for Los Angeles about 3 hours after the game ended. It was a long overnight flight, but the Rays felt that a full day spent in Los Angeles getting some rest was worth it. Brad sat in his seat and waited to see if Kim would arrive. He was actually looking for her after the final match, but she had already left. Memories of his first marriage came back to mind. Since Kim was gone, Brad took 3 aspirin pills to take away his headache and fell into a deep sleep since his wife wasn't around. After arriving at the hotel, Brad was able to sleep for another 4 hours before heading to Dodger Stadium for a workout. The practice was again free-flowing, and the players looked really relaxed. That night, Brad went to bed early and woke up well-rested. But he was still bothered by the fact that Kim wasn't around. He couldn't help but wonder what was going on with her. When Joe announced the starting lineup, Brad was pleased to find that he was still playing right field and batting 8th. The Dodgers seemed nervous and tense to everyone, and the game showed that they were. Fox Sports, Game 6 recap. Miracle of miracles, the Rays evened the series at 3 games, Chip reported cheerfully. The Rays' offense was once again led by Brad Seaver. He was great after being inserted into the game as a pinch hitter in Game 4. Today he had a double in the 3rd inning and led to the first run, and then scored when the pitcher, Thor Grundle, hit a single into right field. Thor had just 2 hits all season, so it was a big deal. The Rays held a 2-0 lead until early in the 6th when the Dodgers' wheels fell off. The Rays loaded the bases, and Seaver walked on a wild pitch. He immediately hit a double off the wall in center field, scoring 3 runs. Bobby Sheffield then delivered a single to right, scoring Seaver. After that, Roger Darby singled into the right field wall. The score increased to 7-0 in favor of the Rays. At this point, the Dodgers manager made a pitching change and called up Tito Velez, the second-best pitcher. Tito was credited with 21 saves with an ERA of 2.33, but sloppy Dodgers defense turned a possible double play into an out at first and third. Andy Pitts' double play pitching then led to 2 more runs to make the score 9-0. The Dodgers managed to score 2 runs when Freeman lofted a ball over the left field wall with 1 out. Seaver had another single in the 9th, but he was left on first. The Rays ended up taking a 9-2 victory. It now comes down to the 7th and final game of the series. We'll be back tomorrow night with the pregame show at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time and Game 7 of the World Series starting at 9:05 p.m. For Fox Sports, it's Chip Fair and Steve Amber. Thanks for watching. After the mandatory locker room interviews, Brad went back to his hotel room to get an ice pack for his head and neck. He dialed the tub and sat in it to soak. 20 minutes later, Brad heard someone in the other room. He was about to get out of the tub when Kim entered the room and smiled at him. He was surprised but pleased to see her. "How are you feeling, sweetie?" she asked affectionately. "Like a 100-year-old man," Brad replied with a weak smile. "I think I'm completely exhausted. I'm going to take some aspirin and go to bed." "Good idea," Kim said as she followed Brad into the bedroom. She watched him take 3 aspirin tablets and a sleeping pill. Kim sat with him until his breathing was deep and even. Then she quietly left him so her husband could rest. Brad slept for 10 hours but woke up tired and still exhausted. It was also a good thing that the headache was gone. Kim was beside him as soon as he stirred. "How are you feeling today?" she asked anxiously. "Still like a 100-year-old man," Brad smiled, glad his wife was still around. He didn't care where she was. She was here now, and that was all Brad cared about. Once the season was over, he would make sure they spent more time together. But in the back of his mind sat the fear that maybe she was waiting for the season to end so she could leave him forever. Brad didn't feel like eating, so they spent a few hours by the pool. Then, Brad took a nap before heading to the stadium. The atmosphere in the clubhouse was buzzing with enthusiasm. But that atmosphere didn't do much to help Brad shed the cobwebs. He wasn't feeling 100%, but he felt much better than he had last night. The final game of the series sent the sports world into a frenzy. Dodger Stadium was filled well before the start of practice. It was reported that scalpers were charging $2,000 for a ticket. Brad's time in the practice cage was wasted as the headache returned. Sitting down in front of his locker, Brad took his usual 3 aspirin pills and leaned against the metal wall behind him. Brad considered telling the skipper about his headache, but decided to see if he would be in the starting lineup. If Brad was in the starting lineup, he would make a decision on whether he was healthy enough to play. But that plan was quickly dispelled when one by one, players came up to Brad to let him know how much they appreciated his efforts and told him they wouldn't let him down in this final game. After that, Brad realized that it would be hard for him to sit out this game if he made the starting lineup. So when the starting lineup was announced, Brad found himself in right field and batting 8th. The decision was simple. Brad would play. 9th inning. "It was an unbelievable pitcher's duel," Chip said as Andy Pitts walked the batter. Dodgers pitchers Kodai Tanaka and Tyler Bowen limited the Rays to 1 hit, and Rays pitchers Jack Sullivan and Gavin Miller limited the Dodgers to 2 hits. Now the Dodgers have inserted Tito Velez, who will pitch for the Rays in the 9th, Scott offered. "I think they saved Sharman in case they get a lead." Chip continued to broadcast. Velez pitches the first pitch, and it's fouled off to left field for a single. Pitts makes the first round, but retreats to the bag when Aponte crosses the ball to second base. "I think the Rays are going to try to put Sheffield on the throw," Scott suggested. "That makes sense, Scott." Sheffield tries a bunt and misses. Strike 1. Velez swings away from the first sign, but is ready and makes the trade. Sheffield hits the ball again. He knocks the ball down. Strike 2. Now, with strike 2, the question is, will the Rays let Sheffield swing away? "I think I'd make him hit anyway," Scott offered. "If Sheffield swings away, he could hit into a double play. They need to get a player in striking position." Here's the next pitch. Sheffield equalizes and swings the ball down the first baseline. Velez quickly leaves the plate, but only has time to make a play at first. Now the Rays have a man on second base with 1 out and Brad Seaver on the way. "Seaver's bat is silent today," Scott offered. In his 2 outings, he pitched an out and struck out a batter, and both times he didn't look his best. 2 pitches later. "The score is 0-2, and I have to admit that Seaver looks very uncomfortable," Chip continued. Velez pitches and shoots. Seaver hit a weak grounder between first and second. Bills and Thorne moved to catch it, but it skipped away and made a single. Matthews runs in and grabs the ball as Pitts is waved in. Pitts slips his head forward and is safe. The Rays finally take the lead and lead 1 to 0 inches. 2 pitches after Brad's hit. On the count, pinch hitter Cleon Johnson is 1-1. He's frozen in place and waiting for the next pitch. It's a fastball, and he fields it on the ground to the shortstop, who flips it to second and then to first for a double play. Now the Rays are just 3 outs away from perhaps the most remarkable comeback in World Series history. Post-match review. "The Rays led 1-0 in the bottom of the 9th inning," Chip began. "But I don't think anyone expected how this game would end. In the top of the 9th, the Rays scored a run. Andy Pitts made a single, and Bobby Sheffield moved him to second. Brad Seaver then made a single that somehow got between the first and second lines, bringing Pitts home from second. But then, the Rays had to face the top of the Dodgers lineup. And Sammy Bills walked the Dodgers' first batter in the lineup, who immediately hit a double that hit the left field wall. Thorne then walked on 4 pitches, and Blanken was hit by a pitched ball. With the bases loaded and nobody out, Ray Freeman walked on a wild pitch. Ray hit a sinking line drive, and I'm sure every Rays fan thought the World Series was slipping out of their hands. But Brad Seaver flew in, dived, snatched the ball before it hit the ground, rolled over, and threw it to Williams at second, who stepped on the bag and then tagged out the runner from first. A triple play. This is only the second triple play in World Series history, the last being made by the Cleveland Indians in 1920. So, it was the miracle of miracles in the World Series. The Tampa Bay Rays became world champions. Your thoughts, Scott? Every day since Brad hit the winning home run in Game 4, I have one moment in sports running through my mind. I'm talking about that moment during the 1980 Olympics, when the American hockey team was playing the Russian team. With less than 10 seconds left, Al Michaels yelled, "Do you believe in miracles?" Yes! Do we believe in miracles today? Absolutely yes. Our producer has just informed me that voting for Series MVP is now complete, Chip announced. And to everyone's surprise, the unanimous choice was Brad Seaver. And I'm told he would have been chosen even if the Rays had lost the series. What a great World Series for Brad Seaver, Scott added. He played 10 official games, racking up 8 hits, 2 home runs, and 14 RBI. He now has the highest batting average of any player in the World Series at 800. Brad never left the locker room, answered all the reporters' questions, had champagne poured on his head several times, was hugged at least twice by the players, and was hugged by all the coaches, managers, and even the team owner. But the whole time he was there, all Brad could think about was Kim. She didn't show up at the stadium. He prayed she was waiting for him in his hotel room. After a couple hours, the press cleared out, and Brad was able to shower and catch a cab back to the hotel. However, when he arrived, Kim was not in the room. Brad waited for him late into the night, but Kim never showed up, and she never returned by morning. Kim also didn't make the return flight to Tampa. At the beginning of the season, Brad tried to make it clear to Kim that this year would be his last. He wondered if Kim had left him for good because of this decision. Fortunately, a large contingent of fans gathered at the airport to support his team, which lifted his spirits a bit, and an even larger contingent at the stadium when the bus dropped the team off. But when Brad finally made it to their apartment, the depression returned as Kim wasn't there either. Tears streamed down his face, and he had to come to terms with the fact that she had left him forever. The next day, Tampa Bay city officials held a parade downtown. And the next day, Brad's agent sent him on a 3-week tour. It was grueling. Practically every minute was scheduled. But after a week, Brad had had enough. The tour meant nothing without Kim. Besides, he was completely exhausted. When Brad opened the door to their apartment, his hope that his wife was waiting for him, there was immediately dashed. There was a musty odor in the air, as if no one had been there for days. Brad looked around the apartment but found nothing unusual. No one had been in the apartment since the last time he'd been there. After drinking a cold beer, Brad went to the bedroom and started packing his things. He decided he was going to head out to their farm. It wasn't really a farm since it didn't have any animals on it. They called it a farm because there was a farmhouse on 22 acres. They had a vegetable garden, but by this time of year it had long since stalled. It was the only place Brad thought Kim could be. Brad's packing was interrupted by the ringing of the phone. He quickly grabbed the receiver, hoping it was Kim. "Hello," Brad answered, his heart racing. "Brad, I'm glad I caught you," answered a voice that didn't belong to Kim. "This is John Walker. I heard you were away on a promotional tour, so I thought I'd take a chance on you being at your house." John Walker was the general manager of the Rays. "Mr. Walker, I'm somewhat surprised to hear from you," Brad said. "Are you upset that I left the tour? It was too exhausting, and I just wanted to get some rest without someone telling me every minute to go here or go there." "No, Brad, I'm not upset at all. I know how this kind of media circus can get to a person. I called to see if we could meet tomorrow morning, say around 10 o'clock. I think so, yes. I'm heading to my estate near Arcadia, so it shouldn't be too hard to swing by my place. Brad was at the Rays office at 9:55 and was ushered into John Walker's office. The general manager smiled, stood up, and extended his hand. Thanks for agreeing to meet with me, Brad, John said as they shook hands. Let me congratulate you on a terrific World Series. Whether you know it or not, you've become a living legend. Brad blushed. I don't know about that. Please sit down. John pointed to the chair in front of him. Let me explain why I asked you to stop by this morning. I want to offer you a new 2-year contract with a significant raise. Brad was stunned at such an offer, but quickly shook his head. No, I'm sorry, Mr. Walker, but I can't take any more. I realize that your regular season was not what you had hoped for, John said soothingly. But in this contract, we provide for a player and coach position. Brad, you're one of the best outfielders in the game. You run the bases with the best of them, and you're one of the few who can hit the ball right. You can teach young players a lot. Brad, we want you to be a part of the Rays family. What do you say? Brad shook his head, and tears ran down his cheeks. There's a reason I can't do it. I have a brain tumor, and it's inoperable. I found out about it before spring training. I'm sorry. I should have told the team, but I desperately wanted to have this last season. John was stunned by what Brad had told him, and tears came to his eyes. But he quickly came to his senses. Do you have a second opinion? I can introduce you to the best surgeons. Brad shook his head again. I've been to 3 different doctors, including Dr. Steinman, who, as you know, is one of the best brain surgeons in the world. They all told me the same thing. The tumor is deep in my brain, and there is no way to remove it without killing me. When they examined me, they all agreed that I had a year to live. That's why I can't sign a contract. I'll probably be gone before spring training starts. Oh my God, Brad, John said with deep concern as tears began to come to his eyes again. I'm so terribly sorry. Is there anything I or the team can do for you? No, I've taken care of everything, Brad said as he stood up and held out his hand. But John didn't take his hand. Instead, he walked around the table and hugged Brad tightly. While John hugged him, Brad's thoughts turned to the question of where Kim was. If only he could find her, things would really be settled. He really hoped she would be waiting for him at the farm. When John let him go, Brad turned and took 4 steps before pain flashed through his head and he collapsed to the floor. When Brad woke up, he immediately realized he was in a hospital. He saw wires running from his body to machines and heard a beeping sound. He looked around and his gaze stopped on the figure beside his bed. Tears ran down his cheeks. Kim was beside him. He didn't care where she was anymore. She was with him now, and that was all that mattered. A nurse wheeled a computer cart up to the nurse's station. Did you get Mr. Seaver's vitals? The head nurse asked. No, he was talking to his wife, the nurse explained. I decided to leave them alone first. The head nurse was about to say something when the alarm sounded. Brad Seaver had gone into cardiac arrest. A code blue was announced, and the resuscitation truck arrived in less than 2 minutes. They worked on Brad for 15 minutes, but there was nothing they could do. He was gone. When it was just the 2 of them, the nurse said, panting slightly, I need to find Mrs. Seaver. She was here only a few minutes ago. I must inform her that her husband has gone. Mary, the head nurse said softly, there's no way Mrs. Seaver could have been here. She died in January of cancer. Epilogue. The sports world was shocked and saddened when the Rays announced the passing of Brad Seaver, but none more so than Tampa fans. Due to the outpouring of grief, the front office immediately organized a burial ceremony for Brad at the stadium. The viewing was supposed to begin at 9 in the morning, but people started lining up before 6. By 7, police estimated the line was 1 to 2 miles long. The decision was made to open the gates at 7:30. Each day the line grew longer, forcing police to close several roads and divert traffic. The stadium was surrounded by flowers, banners, and signs of love. With permission from city officials, the Rays extended viewing hours to midnight, and then to 2 a.m. portable lights were set up to keep fans safe. Finally, at 2:30 a.m., police began letting people out, and at 4:45 a.m., the stadium gates were closed. At 10 a.m., the funeral procession left the stadium and carried Brad's body to Memorial Park Cemetery, where he was buried next to his wife. At the first home game of the following season, Tropicana Field was filled to capacity. The American flag, World Series championship flag, and pennant were lowered but remained folded. After a few words from the Rays owner congratulating the team on their victory and offering condolences to Brad, all three flags were unfurled. When the pennant unfurled, it revealed the number 23, Brad's uniform number. The crowd instantly erupted into a roar and began chanting, "Seaver! Seaver! Seaver!" The celebration lasted a full 5 minutes. In February of that year, Cooperstown opened a permanent exhibit honoring Brad's World Series performance. They took Brad Seaver's highlights from the series and mixed them with music to create a 15-minute video. Within the first 6 months, the video was so popular that the Hall of Fame showed it every 20 minutes. Brad's first wife, Cindy, was married and divorced 4 times. Tim Wilson and Cindy married a few months after her divorce from Brad was finalized. She lived with Tim for 2.5 years until he shot himself in the arm. After dumping Tim, Cindy began dating his teammate, third baseman Randy Abbott. Randy was a star for the Mets, earning an 8-year, $200 million contract. But Randy had a drug and gambling problem. However, he was smart enough to insist that Cindy sign a prenup. Cindy wasn't thrilled about it, but she was sure she could change it later. After 2 years of raucous partying, drug use, and gambling, the Mets put a stop to it. Randy had to change his lifestyle or they would leave him. Plus, during this time, Tim began to lose his qualifications. The Mets sent Randy to a treatment center. When Randy got clean, he realized that Cindy was cheating on him and kicked her out. Cindy went to a rehab center for the first time. It didn't help. The only positive or negative thing about rehab for Cindy was that she met one of the New York Jets players, Dexter Proud. He was an outstanding halfback, but he had his own problems with drinking and partying. 4 months after meeting him, Dexter and Cindy were married. This was the beginning of the end of Dexter's career. Dexter was an alcoholic, and with Cindy's help, he became a drug addict as well. He only lasted a season and a half, after which the Jets let him go. Neither Cindy nor Dexter filed for divorce. They just drifted apart. The marriage did break up when Dexter died of an overdose one night. Cindy was so busy partying that she didn't learn of Dexter's death until after his funeral. Cindy was deeply depressed by Dexter's death, and the fact that she was so consumed with her own pleasures that she missed the funeral. A day later, Cindy went to another rehab program. She finished the program and came out of it clean, but Cindy deluded herself that she was rid of her drug addiction. While she was still relatively clean, she met Tyler Watson, a financial advisor for a major financial house. Cindy fell head over heels in love for the first time in her life, but Tyler was just as enamored. Nevertheless, Cindy talked Tyler into marrying her. But within a few months, Tyler was bored with his wife, and Cindy resumed her party life and became addicted to drugs. When Tyler finally served Cindy with divorce papers, she lost her mind. She wreaked such havoc that Tyler put her under observation. After 72 hours of evaluation, it was determined that Cindy was still a danger to herself and others. She was officially placed in jail. Cindy was furious at being held in a mental institution and refused to do what she was told. Attempts to engage her in conversation made Cindy furious. The administration decided to leave her alone for the time being. It wasn't until the baseball playoffs began, and Cindy realized that Brad was playing for the Tampa Bay team, that Cindy's behavior changed. She followed every game, including the pre- and post-game shows. When Cindy got into an argument in the cafeteria, she was told that if she didn't calm down, she would no longer be allowed to watch the games. Cindy immediately calmed down. Cindy took one of her t-shirts and wrote the number 23 on it. The staff quickly realized it was Brad Seaver's number. And shortly afterward, they learned that Brad was her first husband. When the Tampa Bay Rays team won the World Series, Cindy was happier than she had ever been for as long as she could remember. But when Cindy learned that Brad had died suddenly, she fainted and sobbed. Cindy had to be sedated. After that, Cindy became very withdrawn, but participated in all therapy sessions. After 2 months, Cindy was released. The only report of Cindy after her release was that she visited Brad's grave and left a single rose. After that, she disappeared and no one knew what became of her. Brad's last conversation with his wife. When Brad woke up, he immediately realized he was in the hospital. He saw wires running from his body to machines and heard a beeping sound. He looked around and his gaze stopped on the figure beside his bed. Tears ran down his cheeks. Kim was beside him. He no longer cared where she was. She was with him now, and that was all that mattered. "You came," Brad said weakly. "I was so afraid you'd left me. I love you so much." "I would never have left you," Kim replied lovingly. "But I was limited in how many times I could visit you. I had to leave, but I waited for you. Brad, I love you more than you can imagine. It's time for you to let yourself go and come to me." Brad closed his eyes and the hospital machines sounded the alarm. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.